Some truths never announce themselves. They settle in slowly, like fog curling through a valley at dawn, unnoticed until you're wrapped inside it. My name is Dory Lane. I'm 45. I live in a stucco house tucked near the Sangre de Cristo foothills, where the light bleeds soft over morning adobe. It's the kind of quiet place people move to when they're done with noise. I came here after everything else, the job, the city, the idea of marriage, had gone still. Now I paint. I teach a community class once a week, keep an herb garden in terracotta pots along my windowsill, and go entire weekends without speaking to another soul. It's peaceful. Or at least it was. Until Cruz came home. He's 23 now. My son. My only child. He was supposed to be living in Chicago, knee-deep in an architecture internship, building a life I never dared imagine for myself. But something shifted. He called me one Sunday, voice tight, words careful, and asked if he could stay with me, just for a while. He didn't explain. I didn't press. When he arrived, he didn't look like the boy I kissed goodbye at the airport 3 years ago. He was broader now, his jaw more defined, his gaze steadier. He carried his silence like a second backpack. I missed the sky here, he said, unloading boxes from the back seat of his car. They don't have this kind of blue in the Midwest. I smiled, though it didn't quite reach my chest. We eased into cohabitation the way people do when they're out of practice with each other. Careful, polite, circling routines like uncertain dancers. I cooked, he cleaned. I painted. He disappeared for hours on walks with no destination. In the evenings, we sat at opposite ends of the couch, the sound of wind and vintage jazz filling the space between us. I told myself I was just happy to have him close again. But something wasn't the same. And it wasn't just him. It was me. It started with the small things. How he'd brush past me in the kitchen, his hand at the small of my back, lingering just a breath too long. Or the way his eyes would hold mine when we spoke, longer than necessary, deeper than safe. Once, while folding laundry, I found a sketch tucked between his t-shirts. My face, my profile, drawn in graphite and shadow, expression unreadable. I stared at it for a long time. When he saw it in my hands later, he didn't flinch. "Didn't mean for you to find that," he said, setting his coffee on the windowsill. "But I'm not sorry." I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came. He shrugged. "It's just a study." But it wasn't just anything. It was everything. A week later, I was painting in the studio, sunlight slanting golden across the floor, the scent of turpentine heavy in the air, when I felt him behind me. He didn't speak. He just watched. I dipped my brush, trying to maintain rhythm. My heart had other ideas. "It's strange," he said eventually. "Seeing you this way. Focused. Quiet." "I've always been this way," I replied, not turning. "No," he said softly. "Not always." The words hovered. Too close. Too true. He crossed the room then, silent, slow, and stood beside me, his arm brushing mine. I kept painting, even as my breath betrayed me. "You look different when you're working," he murmured. I set the brush down, turned to face him. His eyes met mine. Neither of us moved. In the silence, I could hear everything we weren't saying. "I should go," he said suddenly, stepping back. I nodded. "Okay." But the space he left behind stayed warm for hours. Later that night, I stood in the kitchen drying wine glasses, the house dim and quiet. Cruz appeared in the doorway, barefoot in loose sweats, hair tousled from the wind. "You still use the same scent," he said. "That oil. The one that smells like cedar and orange." I looked up, startled. "I remember it from when I was little," he continued, stepping closer. "It used to be on your wrists when you tucked me in." I smiled. "I didn't think you remembered things like that." He leaned on the counter. "I remember everything." The air between us shifted. I felt it. He did too. He reached for a glass, his fingers grazing mine. It was nothing. And it was everything. After that night in the kitchen, something shifted. We didn't speak of what lingered in that small, brushed touch between our hands. We moved through the house like people afraid to wake something sleeping. He drank his coffee slower. I opened windows more often, like air could dilute the weight building in the rooms. But space wasn't what we needed. Space only gave the ache room to grow. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find Cruz lying on the floor, sketchpad open beside him, shirt bunched around his ribs, one hand draped over his forehead. He looked like a statue softened by heat, beautiful in a way I didn't let myself linger on. He didn't move as I passed. But I felt his eyes follow me. In the hallway, I stopped, pressing one palm to the wall just to steady myself. I didn't understand what was happening. Or maybe I did. And that was worse. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the wind brush against the eaves, I heard his door open, then close. The floor creaked softly. My breath caught. But no footsteps came to my door. Still, I didn't sleep. Days passed. The air between us grew thick with things unsaid. We cooked meals without conversation. We walked past each other in doorways, our movements choreographed by some quiet, invisible music. And every time we met eyes, it felt like stepping too close to the edge of something I couldn't name. Then, one evening, as I washed the brushes from a long afternoon in the studio, I felt his presence behind me again. This time, he didn't wait. "I can't do this much longer," he said. My hands froze in the water. I keep trying to stop thinking about it. But I can't. I turned slowly, towel clenched in my hand. "Cruz," I began, unsure where the line even was anymore. He stepped closer, voice low. "I know this is wrong. I know what it is." "Then stop," I whispered. "Don't say it." He stared at me, breathing hard. "I didn't mean to feel this way. But it's not going away. Don't make me carry this," I said, softer than I meant. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "You already are." I looked away. When I looked back, he was gone. For 3 days, we avoided each other. No meals shared. No music in the house. Just silence and the occasional distant creak of footsteps. Proof we were still two people trapped inside the same fragile world. I thought he might leave again. And part of me hoped he would. But on the 4th day, he found me in the garden. It was sunset. The sky was all fire and gold. "I'm sorry," he said. I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I'll go," he added. "If you want me to." I looked at him then, really looked. His eyes weren't asking for permission. They were asking for mercy. "I don't want you to go," I said finally. He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding that breath for years. We sat in silence on the stone bench, side by side, watching the light disappear behind the hills. And then, in the quiet, he reached for my hand. He didn't speak, didn't press, just held it, like it was the only thing tethering him to earth. And I let him. That night, I opened my old journals, entries from when he was a baby. I read about sleepless nights, tiny socks, the way he used to crawl into my bed when thunderstorms rolled in. How did it become this? How had the lines blurred so slowly, so completely? I didn't sleep. I listened for his footsteps. They never came. The next morning, I stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, staring at the light breaking through the curtains. Cruz entered quietly. He wore a soft blue shirt, eyes tired but calm. He stopped beside me. Said nothing. I turned to him. And in the space between breaths, something gave way. He stepped closer slowly, as though asking a question he knew he shouldn't. I didn't stop him. His hand lifted, just barely, to brush my hair from my cheek. We were inches apart. I could feel the pull between us. Magnetic, dangerous, undeniable. But we didn't cross it. He leaned in, kissed my forehead. A long, trembling kiss. And when he stepped back, his hand lingered on my face. Then he left the room. And I stood there, shattered in ways I didn't yet understand. After that morning, nothing was the same. And nothing had changed. We still moved around each other with practiced caution. Still shared dinners in silence, filled only by the clink of silverware and the soft hum of the old radio that never quite stayed in tune. Still slept in rooms divided by hallway and hesitation. But now, there was something else. Something settled under our skin. A weight that didn't lift. Cruz didn't apologize again. And I didn't ask him to. Instead, we existed in a fragile standoff of restraint. It was a Thursday when I caught him watching me. I was on the porch, barefoot in the late morning light, sipping coffee and sketching the shape of the mountains beyond the garden. I didn't hear him approach, but I felt him. He stood behind me, not speaking, not moving. Then, after what felt like hours, he asked softly, "Do you ever think about leaving here?" I turned slightly, surprised. "Why?" "I don't know," he said. "Just, if it ever felt like too much." I looked down at my drawing, lines curved into a ridge that resembled nothing. My heart ached. "Every day," I whispered. "But I stay." His voice was quiet. "Why?" "Because it's the only place I've ever felt whole." He didn't reply. But when I turned, his eyes were wet. That night, the electricity cut out during a storm. The house went still. I lit candles, gathering them on the coffee table, and curled up on the couch with an old blanket and a book I couldn't focus on. Cruz joined me after a while, carrying a half-filled glass of wine and a blanket of his own. We sat in the flickering light, listening to the rain. "I used to be afraid of storms," he said, voice low. "I remember," I replied. "You'd sneak into my bed." "I never really stopped," he said. The words held weight. We didn't look at each other. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing mine. I let them linger. When the candle burned low and the house grew cold, I laid my head on his shoulder, just for warmth, just for quiet. But his hand lifted to my back. Not out of comfort. Out of knowing. I didn't move. For a long time, we sat like that, his cheek pressed against the crown of my head, his breath steady. Then, in the silence, he whispered, "I can't keep pretending I'm just your son." My chest tightened. But I didn't flinch. Instead, I said the only thing I could. "I never asked you to." He didn't kiss me. Not then. But he held me as the rain poured around us, and I clung to him like a lifeline I never meant to reach for. When the lights flickered back on, we both blinked in the sudden brightness. And without speaking, we stood, separated by 4 feet of floor and the full weight of everything we couldn't say aloud. The next morning, he packed a bag. "I need to go," he said, voice rough. "For how long?" I asked. He didn't meet my eyes. "Until it fades." "If it fades." I wanted to say, "It won't." But I didn't. Instead, I nodded. He leaned in to hug me. Tight, trembling. His lips brushed my cheek, slow and reverent. And then, just before he stepped away, he whispered, "If it doesn't fade, will I still be welcome?" My throat closed. "Yes," I managed. And then he left. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was hollow. Rooms echoed differently without him. The studio felt colder. The kitchen, too big. And every time I poured coffee, I poured 2 cups by accident. Days passed. Then weeks. I painted obsessively. Nothing beautiful, just fragments, lines, pieces of longing in oil and charcoal. But it wasn't enough. Because nothing filled the space he left behind. Nothing ever had. The winter months were still. I existed in a world of soft light and soundless mornings. I painted less. Read more. Opened the windows even when it was cold, hoping the wind might carry something back with it. Cruz didn't call. And I didn't reach out. Not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know who I would be if he answered. It was late January when I found the letter. tucked beneath a shipment of paints I'd forgotten I ordered, sealed in an envelope marked only with my name. Dory. I knew the handwriting. I would have known it with my eyes closed. I stood at the sink, hands trembling, and read. You asked me once why I wanted to leave. I didn't answer you. Not really. I left because I couldn't trust myself. Because every time you walked past me, I felt like I was unraveling. Because I couldn't keep looking at you and pretending all I felt was gratitude. I loved you before I understood what love meant. Before I knew what desire could become. You raised me. You sheltered me. And then you became the one thing I couldn't let myself need. But I did. I still do. If that makes me monstrous, I'll carry it. If it makes me broken, I'll break again. But if it makes me real, then maybe you'll understand why I had to leave before I asked you for something you could never give. See. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it, tucked it into the drawer beside my bed, and lay down with my face to the wall, letting the weight of all those impossible words settle into the hollow spaces they'd always belonged. Weeks passed. I didn't answer, but I kept the letter close. Sometimes I touched it, fingertips grazing the paper, as if it might speak again, as if there might be something else written between the lines. One evening in early spring, I stepped outside just as the light broke open across the hills. The garden had begun to bloom. I stood at the gate, watching the horizon. And then, slowly like a memory made flesh, he appeared at the end of the drive. Cruz. Taller, older somehow. His hair longer. His shoulders straighter. He carried no bag. Just his hands in his pockets and a question in his eyes. I didn't move. Not at first. Then he reached the steps. Paused. I didn't come to ask, he said quietly. I came to see. See what? If it's still there. I looked at him, really looked, and saw everything. The boy who held my hand during thunderstorms. The man who stood too close in the kitchen. The soul I'd never stopped loving in ways I couldn't speak aloud. And I nodded. Once. Just enough. He stepped closer. No rush. No fear. He reached out, gently, and cupped my cheek. And this time, I didn't pull away. His lips brushed mine. Once. Soft. Not possession. Not conquest. But knowing. And for the first time in years, I closed my eyes. And let myself feel everything I had buried. We didn't speak after that kiss. Not right away. We sat in the garden, side by side, watching dusk swallow the sky. There would be no easy answers. No maps for what we were becoming. But there was this moment. And this truth. Some love doesn't ask for permission. It simply is. And all we can do is choose whether to run from it. Or stay.